So I wanted to do a review of some of the unreleased cards in Marvel Snap. If you didn't know, a lot of cards have been leaked. I'm not going to be going over every single card that's been leaked because quite a few of them, I would assume, are subject to change. We've actually seen some of them change quite a lot. When Ghost Spider was initially leaked through one of the hologram things that they sent out to a few content creators, her stats were 3-3, and then we saw her stats change to 5-7 in the leaked files, and then her effect was when the opponent discards a card, this costs 0. Since then, she's been changed yet again, and now she's a 2-2 with the effect on reveal, move the last card you played here. So obviously, these leaked cards are subject to change. However, I do think the cards that are in the client right now, the cards that you can see silhouettes of if you go to the collection screen, I do think that those are going to be the final versions of those cards. And if they're not the final version of those cards, I would assume that they're very close to the final version. There might be some like stat changes or something like that, but they're not going to have dramatically different effects. I've come up with a star system that I'm going to be using for these types of review videos. You've probably seen a system similar to this in a bunch of these types of videos, but I wanted to give you a good understanding of what my star rating system means to me, and that way you can get a better idea of what I mean when I say a card is like a 3-star card, for example. So I'm using 0 to 5 stars, meaning that there's essentially 6 different ratings. At 0 stars, these are kind of meme cards, cards that don't see any amount of play, and if they do see play, it's probably because somebody's trying to upgrade to a common card or an uncommon card. And in all honesty, if a card is at a 0-star rating, it could probably do with a buff. 1-star cards are niche cards, but they're probably in a good spot, like they probably don't need a buff. You could build a deck around them if you want, but if you do go out of your way to do that, you're definitely building a rogue archetype, or you're using a rogue archetype that's not going to see a ton of play. 2-star cards are cards that can definitely see play in meta-relevant decks, but they're not core to that deck. A 2-star card also might be a tech card that's not particularly good, so you're not going to see it everywhere over the meta, but you're not going to be surprised when it pops up either. 3-star cards are definitely competitive cards. You're going to see a lot of these cards, but they're not really core to any particular archetype, and they're not really having like a huge impact on the meta. 4-star cards are high-impact cards. They're usually going to be cards that you build around, or they're just cards that show up in lots of different decks. They're going to have a really high impact on the games that they're played, and they're going to be very core to the meta that they're involved in. And finally, 5-star cards. These are cards that absolutely completely shape the meta that they're a part of. In patch 1, this would have been, Nova and Devil Dinosaur, but of course they've been nerfed since then. Just because you're a 5-star card does not necessarily mean you need to be nerfed. I might do like 6-star ratings for stuff in the future if I think something is too powerful, but for now, 5-star is the maximum rating. On screen, obviously, you see the Collector, but another example of a 5-star card would be something like Wong, who has spawned a bunch of different archetypes just because his effect is so powerful. So hopefully that gives you a much better idea of what each of these individual star ratings mean. So now we can jump into reviewing each of these cards that are on their way to Marvel Snap. So going in order of energy cost, I'm first going to talk about Titania. Titania is a 1 energy 5 power card with the text, when any card is played at this location, this card switches sides. I tried discussing this with a couple other people in the community because we don't have a solid answer to it, so I was trying to figure out how the game would actually resolve this. If you play Titania, we don't know whether she would immediately swap sides on her own, activating her own effect. My assumption is that Titania would indeed swap sides the second that she's played, because her effect would be in play when she comes into play. For the sake of evaluating this card, I'm going to assume that she does indeed swap sides when you first play her. However, I do think whatever the interaction is, whether she swaps sides immediately or not, most of what I'm going to be saying here on out about the card is still probably true. First of all, I think that the card is actually quite good, even if you don't try to build anything specifically around Titania, and I don't think you should try to build around Titania. I think you just kind of run her in any type of low curve deck that features high power cards, and instead of trying to do some type of elaborate mind games combo with Titania, I think you just play her onto a location that's already full, and you're essentially just using her as a 1 energy 5 power swing, which is already good enough that you would think about running it. I'm going to put Titania at 3 stars, so I think she's going to be competitive, but not, meta relevant or meta defining. I think she'll definitely pop up in a few decks here and there, and you probably won't feel like you're gimping yourself by playing Titania. Unless you play Titania incorrectly, then that'll probably suck. Moving on to Luke Cage, he's a 2 energy 1 power card with the effect ongoing. Your cards cannot have their power reduced. A lot of people are going to immediately undervalue this card, and I completely understand why. Luke Cage is certainly not an incredible card, especially on first glance, but please let me make the case for Luke Cage. Firstly, the card has the keyword ongoing, which is surprisingly important because he is also a cheap card. Spectrum decks really want to run these kind of low-cost ongoing cards, and they don't really care about how much power the ongoing card itself is generating. They just care that they're playing a cheap ongoing card, and Luke Cage is absolutely that. Luke Cage also obviously hard counters hazmat strategies. That's a bit more niche, but he also synergizes with ally hazmats as well. Current hazmat decks try to not develop their own board at all and then kind of go crazy with Wong combos, but Luke Cage enables a more proactive hazmat strategy that probably isn't correct, but it is another thing to keep in mind when building towards that type of deck. I do think it's important to note that Luke Cage's effect isn't just affecting his location, he affects all other locations. Your cards cannot have their power reduced. Effects that are persistent across all locations are fairly rare in Marvel Snap, so I think it's really important to not undervalue just how powerful that can be, being able to affect your other locations from one location that you don't particularly care about. There are a few times where you just want to kind of throw one location and just work towards the other two locations. If you do that with Luke Cage and you throw him into that other location, he's still going to be proactively helping those locations that you are trying to win. Another thing to keep in mind is that you'll be able to pretty much win every minus location or minus power location in the game, because Luke Cage's effect would essentially negate the effect of that location, but just on your side. The player running Luke Cage should probably always win negative zone, for example. That alone obviously is not enough to run Luke Cage in your deck, but it's certainly worth keeping in mind. Spectrum decks are already running Colossus, but Luke Cage probably ends up taking that slot away from Colossus because he also synergizes with Lizard, another card that you also want to run in that deck, just because it is a cheap ongoing card. In conclusion, I'm going to give Luke Cage 2 stars, not like an ultra competitive card, but a card that you definitely can get away with running, especially in certain types of archetypes that really care about having ongoing, and he might end up being a decent tech card against future kind of hazmat style combo decks. I've actually decided to talk about both Kang and Daredevil together because they introduce an entirely new mechanic to the game, and that mechanic definitely deserves some time to be discussed. Daredevil is a 2 energy, 2 power card that reads on turn 5, you get to see what your opponent plays before you make your own. And then Kang is a 5 energy, 0 power card that reads on reveal, look at what your opponent did, then restart the turn without Kang. So both of these cards let you see what your opponent does, but there is some pretty dramatic differences between the two cards that might not be so obvious at first glance. Firstly, Kang completely resets the turn, meaning that your opponent will be able to replay their cards, play entirely new cards, or even play the same cards just in different locations. However, Daredevil lets you get full information about what your opponent has done before you play your turn. Another big difference between the two cards is that Daredevil generates 2 power. It's just a persistent effect that doesn't have a keyword tied to it, so there is no counter to it once it is in play. However, it does need to be in play to be active. It is worth noting that to take advantage of Daredevil's effect, you're going to need to play him before turn 5, which means you're going to need to draw him on turn 4 or sooner. You draw 7 out of the 12 cards from your deck at that point in the game, so you've got a pretty decent chance of having Daredevil in hand, and that's not including any effects that might let you draw a card or something like that. There is a bit of a downside to Daredevil though, which is that your opponent knows that the effect is going to happen, so even though you're going to have more information than them, they know that you're going to have more information than them, so that might affect their play in some ways. But you don't give up a card in the same way that you give up a card with Kang, because Kang essentially discards himself when you activate its effect. I don't believe this has actually been directly confirmed by any second dinner developer, but I don't think that you get to draw a new card when Kang quote-unquote resets the turn. So what you're essentially doing with Kang is you're giving up a card to gain information about the opponent's hand. Being -1 card might be worth it to find out information about your opponent's turn 5 or turn 6, but if you're playing against something like a Heimdall deck and you play Kang and then they reveal that they had a Heimdall and then the turn resets, now if they just play Chavez, you kind of walked yourself into a trap that you made yourself. I suppose I will mention this because a bunch of people have pointed this out with Kang. Yes, he does have good stats for Mr. Negative, but his effect completely nullifies the importance of that effect. It's not relevant that Kang's stats are inverted because his on-reveal effect is going to reset the turn anyway, so you're not going to be able to play that inverted stat card anyway. So unless you're doing some weird Cosmo, Mr. Negative, inverted Kang stuff, that synergy actually is entirely irrelevant. I think Daredevil is quite a bit better than Kang. I'm going to be putting Daredevil at 3 stars. I think he is very playable, and I'm going to be putting Kang at 2 stars. I just think giving up the 1 card to find out what your opponent might have played on turn 5 or 6 probably isn't worth it, and finding out any earlier than that in the game using some type of ramp effect, whether it be Wave or Psylocke, is also probably not worth it. Kind of hedging my bets on putting him at 2, honestly. I could put him lower. I feel like I'm going to look back at this and be disappointed in myself for not putting him at 1. or even 0, honestly. I'll hedge my bet a little bit and say that he's 2 stars. Absorbing Man. Oh my god, I am excited about this card. Absorbing Man is a 4 energy card with 3 power and has the effect on reveal. If the last card you played has an on reveal ability, this card copies it. It's Mystique, but for on-reveal effects. Absorbing Man is 100% a 5-star card. Wong decks already see a lot of play. Absorbing Man fits perfectly into the vast majority of Wong decks. Will create entirely new decks, entirely new synergies, and improve existing ones. There is no world whatsoever where this effect isn't extremely playable. I will be very surprised if I'm wrong about this one. I don't think there's anyone out there that disagrees with this. This card is nutty. I would bring up an example deck for Absorbing Man, but in all honesty, any deck that has like on reveal effects probably wants to run Absorbing Man. Moving on to Valkyrie. Valkyrie is a 5 energy, 3 power card with the effect on reveal, set all cards at this location to 3 power. Many people look at Valkyrie and immediately think of Cerebro decks. We've already seen a lot of 3-bro have quite a bit of success, and Valkyrie would allow Cerebro decks to win any location that they're willing to commit at least 3 cards to, because that's the way the math pans out. If the opponent plays 4 cards at a location, you set all of them to 3, they're going to have a total of 12 power there. But if you have Cerebro in play and then 3 cards at that location, your total power is going to be 15 versus their 12. So as long as you have 2 other cards at a location plus Valkyrie, Valkyrie is going to be winning that lane, though it is not an ongoing effect, so you would need to keep in mind that that location would need to be full for that particular combo to work. But even outside of that particular combo, Valkyrie's doing a lot for Cerebro decks. She allows the 0 power cards, that being Iron Man, Cerebro, and Mystique, to receive the buff generated by Cerebro that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. Iron Man's a bit different because you usually want to jam Iron Man onto a lane that you're otherwise losing, but with Cerebro and Mystique, you're usually putting them on a lane that you don't intend to win at all. But with Valkyrie, you can totally swing that lane out of nowhere because you're setting Cerebro to 3 and Mystique to 3, and then they're both receiving their own buff from their own effects. So yeah, lots of cool stuff going on there with Cerebro specifically, but even outside of Cerebro, I think Valkyrie is just kind of good. If you're playing a deck that wants to put a lot of stuff on the board and you just run cards that add power to adjacent lanes or otherwise cheat power onto lanes that they're not in, Valkyrie can just steal otherwise completely unwinnable lanes. I'm going to be putting Valkyrie at 5 stars. I think she'll absolutely push Cerebro over the edge. I think Cerebro will completely thrive with Valkyrie. I think Cerebro is already a really powerful deck, and Valkyrie will just kind of give it that extra edge that it's missing. I will say I think this one's a bit of a gamble. There's a chance that Cerebro is still just not quite good enough, and if that's the case, Valkyrie will go from being like a 5-star to like a 3-star, maybe even a 2-star. This is my favorite Marvel Snap card, Galactus. He might just be the best Marvel Snap card too. I'm definitely going to be giving Galactus 5 stars. Galactus has tons of synergy that already exists in the game. You've got cards like Sabretooth and Death that could theoretically swing the single lane that you have to win with Galactus. You could even run a card like Deadpool if you want to go that route. There are definitely a few different ways that you can build Galactus, but at the end of the day, it's all about winning just a single lane, and that type of play style sounds so exciting and so unique to Marvel Snap that I'm really pumped to play this card. And you might be asking yourself, well, can a Galactus deck even win the game if it doesn't draw Galactus? And I think the answer to that is yes, especially if it's built correctly. But even if the answer is no, I think Marvel Snap is the type of game that if your deck can only win if it draws one specific card, I think that that deck can still be really good, especially if it's a card like Galactus, which I think more often than not, when you draw it, you will just win the game unless the opponent starts teching against it with cards like Cosmo or, something like that. I think Galactus is so good that you're going to want to run Killmonger in Galactus decks just to clear up the board when Central Park happens. Even if I'm completely wrong about Galactus, I'm going to be putting in so many hours on Galactus. He just opens up such a unique playstyle to the game. Whichever designer over at Second Dinner came up with this card, you're awesome, and I'm going to be playing this card for a stupid amount of hours. Yeah, just super excited about this card that's going to enable entirely different playstyle that isn't in the game right now. Moving on to the Living Tribunal. The Living Tribunal is a 6 energy 4 power card that reads, at the end of the game, split your total power evenly among all locations. We've seen some Omega Red decks that feature Onslaught, Iron Man, and Mystique pull off some crazy boards where they just try to put as much power on the board as possible and then kind of go over the top with Onslaught and Omega Red in some other location. And that type of deck hasn't seen a ton of success success yet, but that type of deck would essentially just start using Omega Red as its worst version of its true win condition, the Living Tribunal. There are a lot of expensive cards that deck wants to play, so it's going to be hard for it to play Living Tribunal, Onslaught, Iron Man, and Mystique. That's a lot of energy, and it's hard to kind of weave all of that together, so it's certainly going to be fairly inconsistent unless some other support is added elsewhere. When that deck hits its ideal draw, it will actually be impossible to beat without an Enchantress. So regardless of how inconsistent or consistent that deck ends up being, you really can't sleep on this card. It's hard to put the words unbeatable and unplayable on the same card, and for that reason, I'm going to put it at least 3 stars. I think this will see some amount of competitive play. You will be annoyed when you lose to it. I certainly don't think it's going to be meta-defining 5 stars or anything like that, because at the end of the day, even if it is really, really good, it's going to be a very difficult deck to pilot. Moving on to our second last card here, we have Thanos. Thanos is a 6 energy, 8 power card with the text at the start of this game, shuffle the 6 Infinity Stones into your deck. So if you'll bear with me for a moment, the 6 Infinity Stones are as followed. Power Stone is a 1 energy, 3 power card with ongoing. If you've played all 6 stones, Thanos has plus 10 power wherever he is. Mind Stone is a 1/1 with on reveal, draw 2 stones from your deck. Reality Stone is a 1/1 on reveal, transform this location into a new one, draw a card. Soul Stone is a 1/1 on reveal, draw a card, ongoing. Enemy cards here have -1 power. Space Stone is on reveal, next turn you can move 1 card at this location, draw a card. And the very last stone, the Time Stone, is a 1/1 on reveal, draw a card, next turn you get +1 energy. So I'll say on average, the stones are pretty good. The Power Stone is probably the worst individually, just because you need all the other stones for it to be relevant. So drawing the Power Stone kind of sucks. It also doesn't draw a card. Mind Stone draws 2, so that's probably really good. We're probably really happy when we draw Mind Stone. Reality Stone is probably a little awkward. There's going to be times where you draw it and you're really happy. There's going to be other times where you play it and you're forced to play it on a location that you kind of like, and you're going to low roll with it sometimes. It's going to be annoying. I will say that Reality Stone is probably very good. Soul Stone is probably fine. It draws a card, but it's not really doing much else outside of that. It does give enemy cards -1 power here, so just at that location, not to the other locations. In all honesty, you're probably losing the location you put your stones on anyway, so we're not really super concerned about that additional effect. So if it's not the worst stone, it's the second worst stone. The Space Stone is actually probably very good, and then the Time Stone is probably the best of the stones that we have here. With that in mind, we can finally start evaluating the card. Thanos is an incredibly interesting deck building challenge for sure. I think most people are going to look at Thanos and immediately write him off as kind of like a meme fun card, and while I definitely don't dispute that he'll be fun, I do think he's more than just memes. There are quite a few cards in the game that directly support the Infinity Stones. Quinjet reduces the cost of all of the stones. Wong affects 5 out of the 6 stones. Each can have some pretty amazing upsides with Wong, if not literally just because they're drawing 2 cards, which is kind of crazy. And then obviously the 1 stone draws all of the other stones, -1. Then you've obviously got cards like Beast and Falcon that can bounce the stones, which is really good. You've got Collector that synergizes with that idea as well. You could run some destruction stuff if you want to blow up the stones. You could run Onslaught to do some Power Stone stuff that's really interesting. It is really difficult to judge whether it's worth running those cards to build around Thanos specifically, rather than just playing a different type of Falcon/Beast deck. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Thanos is a lot better than people think he is. I'm going to say that he's 4 stars, meaning that he will be meta relevant. Perhaps not meta defining, but definitely meta relevant. If you haven't been following a lot of the discussion on this game, you might not know that is a bit of a hot take. That is not a very popular opinion, but it's an opinion I'm going to stick to, at least until we've had the chance to play. Moving on to the very last card we're going to talk about today, and that's She-Hulk. She-Hulk is a 6 energy, 10 power card with the effect that reads, costs 1 less for each unspent energy last turn. She-Hulk is just 5 stars. 10 power on its own is pretty good. 10 power discounted all the way down to 1 or possibly even 0 if you're doing like weird magic stuff, which I don't think is the correct direction, but you know, just for the example, it can be discounted all the way down to 0. That's really good. There are a lot of different types of decks that you could build around She-Hulk, but there are actually already decks in the game right now that can take advantage of She-Hulk's effect that are already being run in the meta. The most obvious of which is Wave. People have already been running Death and Wave together because if you activate 2 destruction procs, Wave lets you play both Death and another card on turn 6 because her cost is set to 4 and then she's reduced by 2 by her in effect, allowing you to play a 4 energy card, which is any card in your hand because you've played Wave, and then obviously Death on top of that, which is going to be more cards than what your opponent can play, and because Death has so much extra power than the average card, you're usually going to go over the top of your opponent if you're at an even point by that point in the game, and it's possible that you can just jam She-Hulk into that deck. There are going to be games where you don't draw Death, and She-Hulk's going to be your alternate win condition, because playing Wave on 5 discounts She-Hulk by 2, which is enough to do the exact same combo that you do with Death. In fact, it's possible that those 2 cards work together so well that you want to adjust that deck in such a way that you're getting more destruction procs in the early game, allowing you in the later game, after your turn 5 Wave, to play She-Hulk, Death, and another card on top of that. Now, you do have to get 4 destruction procs to make that possible, because Death needs to be discounted all the way down to 0 in order for you to be able to do She-Hulk, Death, and another card. But these 2 kind of high power cards that discount themselves might be so good together that you need to kind of modify that existing Wave Death deck that people are playing already to kind of sneak out that extra value with She-Hulk. Alternatively, you could just go in like a Sunspot direction where your goal is to eventually skip on turn 5 and then play She-Hulk. You're already generating 5 power from the Sunspot, and then playing another card on top of that costs 5 or less. That's already 15 power plus whatever your 5-drop generates, which if it's Iron Man, you know, that's 30 power right there. Now, it's a little bit harder to talk about what that type of deck would look like because there is no deck that currently takes advantage of skipping on turn 5 outside of like Sunspot Infinite stuff, which is a thing that exists, but usually it's pretty inefficient to skip on 5 just to play Infinite and get the +5 from Sunspot. You would rather just play a thing on 5 and then find another way of cheating out Infinite, either through like Jubilee or Ghost Rider or something like that. You might even want to run like a low curve deck with your top end being She-Hulk and Moon Girl, and then you Moon Girl on 4, and then on 5 you skip, and then on 6 you do like She-Hulk, and whatever else you have in your hand from your low curve deck. That actually sounds pretty decent. I mean, that's not even in the script for this video. I just thought of that, and that sounds awesome. If She-Hulk does end up being the Season Pass character, I'll probably do a dedicated video of how you should build She-Hulk, I think. But for now, I'll leave you with this thought. She-Hulk, good. And I want to thank you so much for watching this video. This is probably very, very long. My recording for this video is 48 minutes. So the video itself is probably going to be like 20 minutes. So hopefully you were able to stick all the way through. If you did, let me know. I super appreciate you watching the video. I'm probably going to be doing more content related stuff here in the near future. I'm probably going to set up like a Discord and stuff like that. I want to be more interactive with the community rather than just being this background guy who makes some fun decks every now and again. I want to be more involved and try and do some community related projects over the next few weeks, hopefully. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.